To demonstrate how to write a great limerick, I have a couple of examples here. And the first one is from Edward Lear, the 19th century poet who really popularized the limerick. And then the second one is from me. I guess I said how to write a great limerick, but maybe I shouldn't lay claim to that myself. In any case, if you want to write a limerick, there are three things you should watch out for. You should focus on rhyme, rhythm, and content, and we'll cover each of these in some detail. So first of all, rhyme. Every limerick has 5 lines, and they rhyme A, B, B, and A again. And sometimes in older limericks, it was actually quite customary to have the last line rhyme or use the same word in the last line as what you had before. And you can see that here with about. So about is repeated. So that's the rhyme. The next thing is the rhythm. And this is where you're going to see a lot of variation. If you look online or on YouTube and you try to figure out how to write a limerick, you're going to see a lot of different recommendations. Most people, when they talk about the rhythm of the line, they talk about how many syllables there should be per line. And you see all sorts of variations. The usual suggestion is that the first, second, and fifth lines, so the first, second, and fifth lines, these should have about 8 to 9 syllables. And there is some flexibility here. They don't have to be exactly 8 to 9. Sometimes you even see ones with 7 or as much as 10. But 8 or 9 is typically standard. Then the third and the fourth lines, these are a little bit shorter, and they usually have 5 to 6 syllables. And again, there's a little bit of variation, but you can see that Edward Lear's limerick here, the third line has 6 syllables, and the fourth one only has 5. So there's definitely room for play. It gets even trickier when we think about the actual rhythm in each particular line. Because limericks have an interesting rhythm in the sense that they have a lot of unstressed syllables and just a few stressed syllables. So the way to think about this, and this is probably the easiest way to approach this, is to think that these first, second, and fifth lines, they usually have 3 stresses. So you're going to see 3 stresses in these lines, whereas lines 3 and 4 have just 2 stressed syllables. Okay? And you can hear it here. There was an old man who screamed out. That's one way anyways to scan this line. Then whenever they knocked him about, right? Whenever they knocked him about. You can see there's 3 there. But not every line is going to be the same. And as you look more closely at these limericks, you're going to see particular kinds of what are called feet, particular kinds of rhythms come up again and again. So one rhythm would be what's called an anapest. And an anapest is where you have 2 unstressed syllables followed by a stressed syllable. Another common pattern is what's called an amphibrach. Amphibrach. I know these are kind of weird words. And this is where you have an unstressed syllable, a stressed syllable, and an unstressed syllable. And you can hear that in the second limerick here with there once was a man from Seattle, right? And so that's a very common pattern as well. Don't worry too much about these terms. What you really need to see is that a lot of these rhythms, as soon as you add, for instance, 2 amphibrachs after each other, what you end up with a lot is this kind of repetition of unstressed syllables and then the odd stressed syllable. So that's sort of the pattern that you get. And that gives it that really nice kind of lilt where it goes pa-pa-pum, pa-pa-pum, pa-pum, pa-pa-pum, right? And you can vary it, but as long as it has that kind of rhythm to it, then it sounds good. Okay, so that's the rhythm, and again, lots of variation there. Last thing you need to focus on is the content. When you write a limerick, they usually start the same way, and they start with there was or there once was. That's the most common way to start. They often have a place name at the end, and we learn about a particular person. Now, often it's a man, but you can also introduce a girl, and I think contemporary limericks do this more often, or a woman, I should say, not just a girl. So we have a person, we have there was, and then we often have the place name. Then we want to introduce something that happened to that person. We want to make it funny. A lot of limericks these days are written for adults and they contain dirty jokes. But you can write very nonsensical limericks like the ones that we have here that are perfectly clean. So try to have something witty and funny, and don't be afraid to have something a little bit absurd and nonsensical, and even sometimes violent, as you can see in these limericks. It turns out that the people that are being described in these limericks, they're always a bit odd. They don't fit in very well, and people don't always treat them very nicely. So that's basically how you should write a limerick. Remember to focus on rhyme, rhythm, and content, and if you have time, do what Edward Lear did and add some hilarious illustrations.